All right, well, I've got 4 o'clock in the afternoon Central Time, so we're going to go ahead and get started for the last, but certainly not least, installment of the 2021 Southwest Beef Symposium. Greatly appreciate those of you all that have been with us earlier in the week, or maybe even those of you that are joining us for the first time today. It's our pleasure to have Tiffany Dowell Lashmet as our presenter for this afternoon session. Tiffany is an associate professor and extension specialist in agricultural law with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Her and I both work out of the same office, at least on a normal year, here in Amarillo. She focuses her work on legal issues that affect Texas agricultural producers and rural landowners. Tiffany has won quite a few awards for her work in ag law, and she's licensed to practice in both New Mexico and Texas. I believe she's actually a native of New Mexico. Is that correct, Tiffany?
That's right. Yep.
Excellent. And she currently lives here in the Texas Panhandle with her husband, Ty, and their 2 children, Braun and Harper. Today, Tiffany's going to be talking to us a little bit about agriculture estate planning. Tiffany, it's all yours.
Sounds good, Jason. Well, thank you. This is a program that is always fun for me to do, given my background. Like Jason said, I grew up in New Mexico, actually, kind of between Tucumcari and Logan. And so periodically, this ends up being kind of in my hometown, which is fun. I also see a few of the like home team folks in here on the participant list, so that's kind of fun as well. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit this afternoon about estate planning. It's a topic that is really kind of near and dear to my heart. I think it's really important for everyone, but particularly for those of us involved in agriculture. So I'll kind of give a little disclaimer that I have to give when I speak. It basically says I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. So I'm going to give some general information today, but I can't give any specific legal advice. So with that said, I am going to try to take questions as we go along, just because I think that can be really helpful. And so if you all have questions, I'm going to pause at certain times during the presentation, kind of at the end of a section, and see if we have those. Feel free to type them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to try to get your questions answered. The other housekeeping item I want to tell you is, in general, most of this is going to be the same in Texas versus New Mexico. It's pretty generally applicable. I'm going to do my best to flag places where the 2 states are different, just so I try to kind of keep up everybody on the call up to speed for your specific state. So with that, here's a little roadmap of what we're going to cover. If I can get the technology to work, we're going to start with a song, which I know is a little bit crazy to think about with an extension program. I'm not going to sing. I'm going to play a video for you that I think is a great musical introduction to farm and ranch estate planning. Then we'll talk about what happens if you do nothing. So if you don't have an estate plan, if you don't have a will, what happens to your assets at your death? And then we're going to spend most of our time talking about 5 steps to a successful transition plan. And so that's kind of my plan for what we're going to cover. So let's see if I can get this song to play. And it's about 5 minutes long. So listen to the song and then we'll talk about it.
Well, I was born in this valley, on this ranch I was raised. I learned to look up and down on the lazy edge, where the roots of my people, they run deep on this place. I am 6th generation on the lazy edge. When it came to the future, I never gave it a thought. If there were broncs to be broken, endless steers to be caught, well, my youth, it was carefree, for the work was my play, and what I loved would always be there on the lazy edge. I had one beloved sister, a few years younger than me. Before we sold, cowboy kissed her, she left for school in the east. Me, I might.
Well, problem. Hang on.
Be caught. Well, my youth, it was carefree, for the work was my play, and what I loved would always be there on the lazy edge. I had one beloved sister, a few years younger than me, before a soul cowboy kissed her. She left for school in the east. Me, I might have gone to college, might have liked to fly planes, but my dad needed help to run the lazy edge. So I worked there alongside him, put idle years in this place, and I gained appreciation for the lines on his face. And when Mom had grown older, and when Dad passed away, it fell to me to look after the lazy edge. By now my sister, she had married a sharp attorney back east. We didn't see eye to eye, but I did my best to make peace. What did they see when they looked over the fence one fine day? They saw a whole lot of value in the lazy edge. So after thought and assessment, the court awarded them half, and no calf operation carries that kind of cash. Well, I worked through the numbers, worked them every which way. Yeah, I went through the numbers, oh, and boys, I'm afraid I had to sell 40 sections of the lazy edge. Sometimes right isn't equal, sometimes equal's not fair. There will soon be rows of houses on that ridge over there. Many lifetimes of labor will be all but erased. So shed a tear and look skyward. God help the lazy edge. The last few years were a struggle, but I gave it my best, and I tried to go forward on the land that was left. Well, I have lived with sorrow, and I will die with shame, for now the bank owns what's left of the lazy edge.
Okay, well, that's a depressing way to start off a program, right? But I think that song is really effective in sort of explaining the importance of what we're doing here. And if you think about what we heard in the song, I'll bet almost everybody here can identify with one of the issues that he talks about, right? So we've got a family that didn't think very much about the future. They just assumed what they love would always be there, right? They're busy ranching. They're not thinking about legal issues and selling land and how to divide the property. The brother gives up college and helps dad at the ranch. That's a scenario that has happened to a lot of families, right? Where you have this kind of sweat equity issue of one kid stayed home and did the work. So, you know, how does that play out when it comes time to leave the land to the next generation? His sister moves back east and marries a city boy. His dad dies, his mom is old, and the brother is kind of left to take care of things. And then there's a line in there where they talk about what did the sister and her husband see when they looked over the fence at the ranch, and they saw a whole lot of value, right? I think this brother would say he saw a whole lot of value too, but it was different kinds of value that they were talking about. They end up with the court awarding sister half and the brother half of the property, right? Then we have a situation where the brother doesn't have the liquidity to buy her out, right? So she's gonna sell, she's gonna get her money, but the brother can't afford to buy it. And so I think they say that they end up selling 20 sections, or maybe it was 40 sections of the ranch, because he can't buy her out. And then there's a line that I think really makes us think, sometimes right isn't equal, sometimes equal isn't fair. And that's one that I think hits a lot when you've got an on-farm heir and an off-farm heir, and a lot of people really try to think about when they're working on an estate plan. At the end of the song, the brother can't generate enough income with the remaining land, and the bank ends up foreclosing on the mortgage, and he loses this ranch that's been in his family for 6 generations. So this song feels a little bit like a punch in the gut, frankly. And I swear whoever wrote it must have been an estate planning lawyer, because this straight up is what we're trying to avoid when we talk about estate planning programs. So kind of with that background, let's talk a little bit about what happens if you have nothing in place. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation about this. So if you die and you don't have a will, it's not nearly as simple as, well, everything just goes to my spouse, right? Or I also hear sometimes people will say, well, if you die without a will, everything goes to the state. Neither of those are really true. Here's the kind of rundown of what would happen. If you die without a will, okay, and you don't have, or there's not some other disposition of your assets, the government will determine where your assets go. And the way that happens is through what's called intestacy statutes. So all 50 states have these statutes, and they're basically a formula that says, when someone dies without a will, here's what's going to happen to their assets. And you sort of have to plug into the different formulas where you fit. So like there's one formula, if you die and you're married but have no children, here's what happens. If you die and you're married with children and the children are all also the biological children of your spouse, here's what happens. If you die and there are stepchildren involved, it's a different formula. So it's this very formulaic process that you go through, and that determines how your assets are going to be distributed. The likelihood of there being a dispute among the heirs oftentimes increases if there's not a will. And the reason for that is that or that intestacy statute, right? That statute that tells us where assets go is one size fits all. But we all know that no family is one size fits all. So I'll almost guarantee you what that statute is going to do is never what the person who died would have wanted done had they made that decision. The other thing that happens, if you have to go through the intestate statutes, is the probate process is going to take a lot longer, and it's going to cost more money. And the reason for that is if there's not a will, there has to be an entire heirship proceeding before you can ever start the regular probate process. And that heirship proceeding, it's going to involve lawyers. You're going to have to go to court. They're going to appoint what's called an attorney ad litem for any unknown heirs. It's just a process with a bunch of hoops to jump through. Every one of those hoops takes time and money that could be avoided if somebody had even a super simple will that just said, I leave everything to my wife. I mean, honest to goodness, if you went today and wrote that on a paper and signed it with a couple of witnesses, you're better off than having nothing and having to go through this process. So here's just an example of how these intestacy statutes would work in Texas. New Mexico results are going to be similar, but some of the fractions are going to change. So the numbers aren't quite the same, but you'll get the idea. So in Texas, if a husband dies without a will, where does his property go? Let's look at the example on the left of the screen. If he's married with no children, okay, then the wife gets all of his personal property and half of the real property. So the real property is the land, right? The other half of the real property goes to the husband's parents. So read what this says, right? If my husband dies tomorrow, I would now own the ranch, half me, half my mother-in-law. Okay, and I want you to think about some examples of where that might not be the ideal situation, right? I bet you have a couple of those that can come to mind. So let's look at another example. If the guy is married with children, okay, there's a little asterisk here. Let's assume all the children are biological to him and the wife, okay? So no blended family. The wife gets half of the personal community property and the children get the other half. For separate personal property, the wife gets a third and the children get 2/3. And for the real property, the land, the wife gets a third as a life estate and 2/3 goes to the kids. The way I always sum that up for people is I don't want part of owning anything that involves that many fractions. I mean, can you imagine trying to do anything on that land, like sell land or lease land or deal with anything when you have that type of ownership? So again, if we can get us out of those intestacy statutes, that by far is the best thing that we can do. Okay, so that's what's happened if you do nothing. Let's talk about the steps you can take to create a successful transition plan. And my goal here is to leave you kind of with a list of practical stuff you can do to try and make this successful as possible. I'll offer you this. It's about to be a lot to write down because 5 is kind of misleading. There's like 28 little sub pieces. If anybody wants a copy of these slides, if you'll shoot me an email at the end of this, or if you'll give me a call, I will send you a copy of the slides. So that way, if you don't want to take notes, you can have that offer. Okay, the first step I think you want to look at is creating a flight plan. So what's a flight plan? Well, I used to give this presentation and I would call it a death folder. But God, that sounds awful, right? You need this folder where you put everything in it in case you die. So a lady came up to me when I was presenting in San Angelo one time and she said, honey, don't call it a death folder, call it a flight plan. You know, like the song, I'll fly away, flight plan. So I've used that ever since. I think it's great. Essentially what this is you're going to gather up information and put it in one place. Okay, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of the content you need to think about including. This is one of the best gifts you can give your family. And it's useful not only when someone dies, but if someone is ever sick or incapacitated, having this all pulled together in one place so that we're not like rifling through all of the, safety deposit boxes or the filing cabinets or the dashboard of the pickup, right, is really helpful. So what do you want to gather up? Any estate planning documents that you have. So if you've got a will or a power of attorney or anything like that, get it in this flight plan, have it here so no one has to go digging for it. There's going to be a lot of different financial information that would be useful to have. So the first is information about any sort of retirement plans, an IRA, a 401k, a pension. Just put that information in this folder. I told my parents one time, when you get the monthly statement, just take the statement, the first page, and stick it in there. Because then somebody's going to have the name of the institution that holds the money, the account number, right? And probably the phone number to call. So that can be really useful. Copies of life insurance policies, right? Life insurance companies are not hunting down people to make sure they get them paid. You have to know to call them. And so having that information in there is really useful. Bank account information, even just a list of accounts, right? I have this account at First National Bank or this account at Wells Fargo. This account with the account number, super helpful. And while you're doing that, it's a good idea to look and see how those accounts are set to act at death. So what I mean by that is Some accounts are like transfer on death accounts or joint owners with right of survivorship. That account would automatically transfer at death to the other person. There wouldn't be any other steps that are taken. If you have an account without that type of language, then it would just be part of the probate estate and it would pass through the will or the intestacy statutes. So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to set those up. You just want to make sure you understand how you have it set. Information on the safety deposit box, where are they and who can access them? Particularly important if you're going to keep your flight plan in the safety deposit box. Okay, debt information and pay schedules. So I don't know how things work in your house. At my house, I'm the one that handles paying all the bills. That's because I sit at a desk all day, right? My husband's like in the field. And so I take care of the bills. Here's what I can tell you. If I got knocked in the head tomorrow and was unconscious for the next 2 months, my husband has no idea what bills need paid, how much they are, when they're due, none of that. So just a simple list that kind of gives people that information can be super useful. Copies of health insurance policies that may come up where you need that. Any sort of burial plot information or funeral instructions you want to go ahead and have in this folder as well. Email and computer passwords, right? This is important for the time of the world that we live in where we do so much on the computer. So, one example of this is if you keep your cattle records on the computer, there may be a password to access your laptop and then another password to get into whatever software you're using. You don't need that to die with one person, right? You need to make sure someone else has access to things like that. Then there's just a number of documents that may come up, deeds, titles, registrations, leases, surveys, like birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates. Get all of that in here again, where someone needing a document knows right where to go. Another thing that you need to work on, and this one's a pain, and I know that, is you need to have kind of a list of your assets. So a list generally of your personal property and a list of your farm or ranch assets. Here's why. In a minute, we're going to talk about the estate tax, and you're going to need to be able to ballpark the value of your estate. To do that, you're going to kind of have to have a list of assets, right? And I'm not saying you have to go count every towel in the house. I mean, you can ballpark the value of your house. There's tables that do that based on the size of the house. But this is things like land, equipment, livestock, vehicles, right? Those assets that wouldn't be quote unquote like normal household assets. You need to list those and get a ballpark fair market value. And then copies of crop insurance policies, FSA or NRCS contracts can be really useful in there as well. And then the last thing is a list of your business relationships. People like who's your lawyer, who's your accountant, your banker, your insurance agent. If you've got investments that you have someone managing, any livestock buyers or haulers or whatever, have a list of those relationships. Again, where if someone had to step in, they have the information to do that. I call this the gun safe lesson. So I give this presentation and I don't know, maybe 2 years into doing it, someone said, hey, I have something you need to add to your list for the flight plan. And I said, sure, what is it? And they said, well, you need to have the combination to the gun safe. And I'm like, yeah, good idea. And then it dawns on me, guess where my own flight plan is? In the gun safe that only me and my husband can access. So make sure wherever you're going to put this, there are additional people who can access it in the event that there's some sort of situation that happens. Okay, so that's step one, is creating that flight plan. The good news is that's free, right? I didn't say you had to use a lawyer on that one. The bad news is there's a lot of work to be done there. So that's the first step. So I don't see any questions yet. If you guys have questions, put them in that chat box and we'll make sure to try to get to those. The second step is determining your goals.
this is where you really need to think about what are our goals, what are our desires. And I think that one of the best ways to get started on that is to have kind of a family meeting. Now, listen, I understand, okay? My daddy is a farmer rancher. My husband's a farmer rancher. I know that they love the thought of sitting down and talking about things like this in a group, okay? It's really important. And so my slide says, I don't recommend the Uncle Fred approach. Y'all know Uncle Fred. Everybody has one who says something like, I don't care. I'm not going to worry about all this. I'll be dead. You guys can figure it out when I'm gone. That's fine for Uncle Fred. That's a disaster for the operation that he's leaving behind. And if you look at the statistics of the success rate with which we pass a family business from one generation to the next, they're awful. And so not having a plan doesn't work. So I really do think that having this kind of family meeting to have a conversation is one of the best things that you can do. You want to kind of include everybody who may have an interest, and the conversation really needs to be around figuring out everybody's interest, their values, their goals, their willingness and their ability to participate in the business operation, right? If you're thinking, well, I'm going to leave this place half and half to both my kids, but one of those kids has no desire to move home and all they want to do is sell that half of the property to get the cash, maybe that changes how you want to set that up and leave that to them. But you may not know that unless you have some of these conversations. You want to think about the best time to do this. There's different schools of thought on this. I mean, a lot of people try to do it at Christmas, right? Because everybody's in the same place. Other people say, don't do it at Christmas and ruin the holiday with this family powwow. So think about that. The other thing I'll say is know that it may be ongoing. And that, for my family, that's how that's played out. I mean, we started this conversation probably a year and a half ago, and we're still having it. I mean, we sat down and kind of nothing was resolved. It wasn't like we tied it all up with a bow and my parents signed the papers. But we've been talking a lot about, well, what if we did this, or what if we did that, or how about this idea? And we don't have everything resolved yet, but it really has kept a dialogue going that I think has been super helpful and really healthy as we look at what the plan is going to be when that time comes to transfer our family operation to my brother and myself. There are, if you want some professional help on this, I mean, you know, for most of us, that probably isn't really a viable option, but there are family communication specialists and mediators who can come in. I know particularly some families where there is a lot of strife or where it's a really big operation, hiring someone to help with this may be something that's really useful. As you have these conversations, I think you as the person who's making the plan, you have to identify what your most important goal is. And frankly, that should be one of the first questions a lawyer asks you, because what your goal is going to really drive where your plan needs to go. Okay, and so here are some of the common goals that I see when we talk to ag families. You may want to keep the land in the family, right? Like no matter what, you want to make sure the family owns that land. Maybe you want to divide everything equally between the kids, right? And there are some situations where people say like, no matter what we do, I want to make sure every kid is created equally. They each get their same share. Maybe you want to make sure the land stays in farming or ranching. You don't care if it's your family that does it, but you just want to make sure that there's never like a housing development that gets built on the family land. Maybe you want to keep the greedy daughter-in-law's hands off the place. I've heard that more than once. Maybe like my mom, she would say, we want to make sure that our kids are still speaking at the end of this process. So that may be the goal. This is kind of like the song we talked about. You may be needing to determine how to fairly or equitably divide the farm if you've got on-farm and off-farm heirs, right? And you got to figure out, how do we value that kind of sweat equity that the on-farm heir has put in over the years? That may be something that's a real priority to you. You may want to not lose everything you've worked for to taxes. You may want to make sure that mom and dad can qualify for Medicaid. right? So maybe there are things you need to get out of their name and transferred early to qualify for something like Medicaid. So again, and the reason this is so important is you could pick two of these, and what I would tell you to do would be drastically different. Okay. And that's why you've got to really identify what your main goal is to get the plan that really fits your situation. As we look at goals, those are going to be things like, what are we going to do with the farm, right? We've already kind of talked about that. Long-term care may be an issue. So how are we financially going to have the farm continue to provide for the needs of the retired generation, right? Do we need to make sure that they have a place to live? If someone needs to go into a nursing home or we need home health care, how are we going to pay for that, right? Or what steps do we need to take where we can qualify for different services? The taxes are something that you're going to have to think about. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. There's estate tax, the gift tax, and capital gains taxes you really need to think about. There are considerations about whether you should transfer assets now or wait until death. There's a lot to think about there that you need to work through. So there's just a lot of these things you really need to think through and work through with an attorney to help come up with the best potential plan. Let's talk about taxes here just for a little bit. And I want to hit on the three main taxes that kind of come up in the estate planning process. The first one's the federal estate tax. So this is not a state specific thing. It's IRS federal level. It's a tax that gets assessed on assets that are transferred at death. Okay, so when someone dies, if you are leaving assets behind, there's a tax that can be imposed on those. Now, for 2021, so if someone dies this year, they've got what's called an exemption. It's called their lifetime exemption of $11.7 million per person. What that means is that person can leave $11.7 million of assets without paying a estate tax. Okay? This used to be a way bigger deal because about 20 years ago, the exemption amount was $1 million. Right? So you can imagine if you own land and cattle and a trailer, you can pretty easily get to $1 million worth of assets. So because of that larger lifetime exemption amount, at least for now, this affects fewer people than it used to. It's based on the current market value of your assets. So what it's worth at your death. Here's why this is so important. If you're over the limit, the tax you pay is 40% on the amount that's over, and it's due in cash 9 months after the person's death. It does not include mortgages or debts or property given to charities. So if you're kind of calculating your amount, you can take those out. It's also not owed on any property that you leave to the surviving spouse. Okay, so that works great when the first spouse dies. So let's say that I pass away, leave everything to my husband. I don't owe any estate tax. But where that can bite us is when my husband dies and now he owns the whole estate. If he is over the limit, then that's where we may have to pay it when he leaves it to someone else. Okay. There is something called portability between spouses. Just kind of file that term away. Essentially what that lets you do is if the first spouse to die doesn't use their entire exemption, they can transfer and give that leftover to the other spouse to just increase the amount of exemption that they have. Okay, that's the state of the law right now. It's kind of as permanent as Congress, which probably doesn't make anybody feel super great right now. So Congress could come in tomorrow and say, we're doing away with the estate tax. We're not having it anymore. Or Congress could come in and say, we're going to change that exemption and it's going to go to $1 million. In which case, everybody in America has got to run to their accountant and their lawyer and get something done, right? I will tell you what's set for now is this 11 million amount is in place through 2026. And in 2026, it kind of sunsets back to 5 million a person. So, and now Congress could change that between now and again. But for now, that's what would happen. So if you guys have any questions, again, make sure you type them in the chat box. The big takeaway on the estate tax, though, is if you think your estate is worth even close to the exemption, and I'm talking if you're within like a couple $1 million, you need to go talk to your accountant and your attorney tomorrow, okay? Because there are things you can do to avoid this liability. You may be able to put things in an irrevocable trust. You may be able to use some different business entities. There are things you can do, but you have to do them now. Okay, I see a question about what was the amount in 2019 and 2020? They were around that $11 million mark. It adjusts up each year for inflation. So I think in 2020, it was about 11.3 or 4. 2019 probably was right around 11. So it's going to be in that range. It just adjusts for inflation. If you Google estate tax exemption 2019, you can get the exact amount. Okay, any other questions on the estate tax? Okay, let's talk about the gift tax. This one I feel like is maybe the most confusing because it ties in with the estate tax. So what lands are taxed? So Loretta, for the estate tax, it's done on the value of your estate at your death. So any land that you own, any assets, whatever, is considered as part of your taxable estate. That's what they base that number on. So it's not like there's specific land that's exempted. If you own it as part of your estate, it's subject to the estate tax. Okay, so the gift tax is a separate tax. Again, federal level, okay, IRS tax on the transfer of property from one person to another if they receive nothing or less than full value in return. Okay, so let's say sometimes people will say to me, well, I'm gonna get the ranch out of my name. I'm just gonna go deed it over to my kids. That's fine, and there can be reasons to do that, but you may face some implications from the gift tax because you just transferred property for no or less than fair market value. Okay, so the way that the tax here works is every year you've got what's called an annual exclusion, which says you can pass $15,000 every year from one person to another. Okay, so if you only give somebody something worth $15,000, no gift tax. If you're over that in a certain year, okay, if your annual exclusion, if you're over that amount, then you have to file a gift tax return. You don't necessarily owe any money at that point, because here's what they do. However much you're over your exclusion, they deduct that amount from your lifetime exemption, which means, so let's say that I am 0.7 million over my annual exclusion. They would go to my 11.7 million lifetime exclusion for the estate tax and deduct it. So instead of having 11.7, now I'd only have 11. So you don't actually pay a gift tax until you're over, right? Until you've used up all that lifetime exemption. But it could have a real impact on you if you've spent that down. And so in that way, the gift tax can really impact the estate tax. Okay, and again, this is if you transfer any property for less than market value. And so what I always tell people is if you're going to gift anything, if you're going to just transfer something, you need your accountant involved ASAP to help you work through some of these issues and make sure you're not doing something that will bite you from a tax standpoint. Okay, that's the gift tax. The last tax we're going to talk about, okay, is capital gains taxes. These are taxes that you owe when a person sells assets that have appreciated in value over time. And this applies to almost any asset. It can apply to stocks or, I don't know, baseball cards, breeding animals. The big concern, I think, in ag, the primary concern is land, right? Because you think about, well, I'll use my grandma as an example. She bought some of our land for like $50 an acre at the time. Okay. And she's held that land for long enough that now it's worth, I don't know, $500 an acre. And so if that land is sold, she would owe the capital gains tax on the difference between 50 and 500. Okay. And you pay a tax on the increase of that asset. Now, this is important. The only time you pay capital gains is if the asset is sold. So for example, right, we've got a family ranch. We aren't planning on selling it. I'm not that worried about capital gains taxes. This isn't a huge part of my estate planning process because I don't plan on selling it. All right. Now, if you're going to sell the land, this is a huge deal. So just keep that in mind. The amount of tax you owe for long-term assets, it's between 0 and 20% based on different factors. You can talk to your lawyer about that or your accountant. There's something called a 1031 exchange that you can do to avoid capital gains tax. If you're going to like sell one ranch and buy another, you can avoid this with a 1031 exchange. And again, the details of that are kind of beyond what we have time for today. Here's one really important issue for agriculture related to capital gains, and it's been in the news lately. So there's something in the law right now that's called the step up in basis. And essentially what that says is if assets are inherited during ownership, right, when they are inherited, you can change your basis from the purchase price to the price at the time it was inherited. So let me use an example. I told you my grandma bought land for $50 an acre, and today it's worth $500. Well, when she died in 2004, let's say it was worth $300. Because when my grandma died, if my dad inherited that land by will at her death, he gets that step up in basis. So it's not 50 anymore, it's 300. And now the capital gains tax that we owe is only on that $200 instead of on $450. Okay? You only get that step up in basis if it's transferred at death. So if you were to deed that over while you're alive, they don't get a step up in basis. Okay? So again, an important thing to think about when you're figuring out how to pass that asset is, are capital gains taxes an issue? And be watching for this too. It's been in the news because there's been some talk that President Biden may be considering doing away with the capital gains tax. Keep an eye on that. I know that a lot of the ag groups are really working hard to advocate that this is a really important provision for us and that needs to be maintained. So just keep that in mind. Any questions on taxes or kind of otherwise that section on setting your goals? Okay, I don't see any. So if you go ahead and type them if you have them.
Hey, Tiffany, it did look like there was
Jason.
a question on which lands are taxed versus are not. I don't know if you did talk a little bit about lands in there, but if you need to elaborate on that a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, Loretta, the only other piece on that that's different is the capital gains tax, remember, only applies if the lands are sold. So like if I inherit the land and never sell it, I never pay a capital gains tax. That's the only distinction about capital gains. Okay, but with that, we're going to breeze through step 3. Yeah, someone's asking for my email. Not a problem. I will give that to you. I've got it on my last slide. Jason, would you type it in the chat box there if you don't mind? I would do it, but my computer won't let me. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, I can do that. And just to remind everyone that we will make presentation slides available to you after we're able to compile everything at the end of the meeting. So certainly that'll be available, but I'll go ahead and type your email address into the chat to everyone right now.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to breeze through step 3 just because we don't have time to get in the weeds on this, but it's talking about a business succession plan. And I actually do see my parents' neighbor on the call. Hi, John. He's going to recognize this road very well. So a business succession plan, here's some things you want to think about. And I think it's easy to overlook this because we talk a lot about, a will and who's going to own what and thinking about ownership. We also really need to think about who's going to manage the ranch, right? How are we going to make sure that this business, right, transfers to the next generation and the operation of the business continues? And that's a piece of it we don't want to overlook. So when we think about that, these are going to be things like who's going to be involved in the management of this ranch, right? That's everything from who's going to actually be here to feed the cows to who's going to take care of things at the FSA office, who's going to take over, right, all of the things that the older generation is currently doing. How will new roles be created and existing roles changed? What type of training, education, and experience does the next generation need? And you want to start with some of that training and teaching now, right? What we don't want to do is dad dies and takes all of the knowledge that he has built over his lifetime on the ranch with him. We've got to think about how we're going to transition the operation of the ranch to the next generation. Another thing you might look at here is whether using business entities can be helpful. Sometimes things like LLCs or corporations or limited partnerships can be useful in helping the transition of the operation and kind of setting up who's going to do what. It might be worth looking into some of those. And again, that's kind of beyond what we can cover today, but that's something else to kind of consider. Okay, step 4, this is probably why you actually thought you were coming, okay? Here's where I'm going to give you a list of the documents that you need to think about. So the first one is, I think there are 4 documents that everybody needs. And this is whether you are, 25 or 85, whether you've got a ranch or a house in town, everybody ought to have these 4 documents: a will, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and an advance directive. Okay, so let's walk through those. Everybody knows, right, that a will is basically a document that just tells you how property is going to be distributed at death. Keep in mind that there are some assets that pass outside the will. This is super important, okay? Because let's say when I started at A&M, I get a retirement plan and I get life insurance. And on the first day, right, I have to designate who are my beneficiaries. That's called a non-probate asset, and that passes through the contractual beneficiary designation, regardless what the will says. So I always remind people, if you have anything like life insurance, retirement accounts, pension accounts, transfer on death accounts, double check those beneficiaries and make sure they're up to date, because the will won't govern that. Okay. As far as the legal requirements for making a will, in Texas, they can either be handwritten or typed. Okay. Same for New Mexico, handwritten or typed. If you're going to do a typed will, you need to have it all typed out and you sign it in front of 2 witnesses. It's best if those witnesses are not blood related to you and they're not inheriting under the will. So like when we did ours, we went to the bank and the tellers were our witnesses. Okay. In Texas, if it's a handwritten will, it has to be all in your handwriting. It doesn't require witnesses. I'd probably recommend having them, but you don't have to. In New Mexico, both typed or handwritten needs those 2 witnesses. Okay, so that's kind of the rule. It may be worth considering what's called a self-proving affidavit. That's just a notarized affidavit that basically says, I, Tiffany, signed this will on this date. It gets notarized. And the reason that's important is when they admit your will to probate, if you've got an affidavit to submit, they don't have to go track down your witnesses to come testify that you signed it. So that's usually a good thing to have. The will itself does not have to be notarized to be valid. If you want the self-proving affidavit, that does. Okay, and then remember, you need to revise and update your will when major things happen. if people get married, if they get divorced, if someone is born, if someone dies, if you buy new property, you need to make sure and update your will. Okay, so that's the will. I'm going to say this. I know that you can go to like Office Max and get a will for like $39.99. I cannot tell you the number of lawsuits you see over those because they don't work for every situation, especially for ag. So this is my plea to you. I'm going to give you 3 forms in just a minute you can do for free from the internet. A will is not one of them. So I really think it's worth using an attorney. Go get yourself a will that fits your situation, that's done right for your jurisdiction. It's worth the money that you're going to spend. Okay, the next document is called an advanced healthcare directive. Basically, this is directions to your doctor about whether or not you're going to want artificial life-sustaining procedures in the event you're diagnosed as terminal or irreversible. Okay? In Texas, it's got to be signed before 2 witnesses or a notary. In New Mexico, the witnesses are optional. You can have them or you don't have to. It's effective when you're diagnosed as terminal or irreversible. And both Texas and New Mexico have statutory samples, which means in the statutes, there's a sample form. You can print it off, fill in the blanks, sign it before your witnesses, and you're good to go. Okay, but essentially this is just a direction to your family about whether or not you want life-sustaining procedures. Again, only comes into play if you're terminal or irreversible. You also need a medical power of attorney. So this is still dealing with medical decisions, but here what you're going to do is you're going to appoint somebody to make medical decisions on your behalf in the event you're incapacitated. So this could be for all medical decisions, and you don't have to just be terminal or irreversible, right? So I had surgery a couple of years ago. I'm unconscious. A decision had to be made. My husband's my medical power of attorney. He made the call, right? I wasn't terminal or irreversible. It wasn't a decision about life support, but it was a medical decision that had to be made, and I wasn't able to make it. Okay. In Texas, you can have it notarized or signed by 2 witnesses. New Mexico, again, the witnesses are optional. It's effective when your doctor says you cannot make decisions. And as soon as you can make decisions again, it's not effective anymore, right? So it can kind of go in and out depending on your ability to make those decisions. And again, there are forms available that are fill in the blank in both Texas and New Mexico. The last one that everybody needs is called a durable power of attorney. Same concept, but instead of medical decisions, it's things like financial and business actions. I will appoint someone as my agent to act on my behalf. And in both states' forms, you can kind of select what powers you want to give somebody, or you can limit them. This one has to be notarized, so you do have to use a notary. And in New Mexico, if it affects real estate, you've got to file it in the deed records where the property is located. So this is, again, a good thing to have. It's effective until someone dies. So once someone passes away, this doesn't work anymore. Okay, and I know that we're running out of time. I just want to mention these. These are documents you may need. Okay, there can be really good reasons to have them. I don't think everyone needs them. A trust can be really useful in certain circumstances. Out of hospital, do not resuscitate order, that's a DNR. And then if you have minor children or adult children with special needs, you want to have a document that provides for their care. So those are some more documents just to think about. The last step is drafting and implementing the plan. You just need to work with your lawyer, your accountant, potentially your banker to get all of this put together. And then once it is put together, you need to continue reviewing it. So I always recommend an annual review of the documents. Just flip through them and make sure that nothing has changed. A couple of additional resources that are out there on the internet. you guys will have these in the materials. If you want to Google them, you can see some additional information. The last thing I really like to bring up when I do these presentations is why go through the hassle. I know that hearing me talk about this is like drinking from a fire hose, right? It's a ton of information. I talk too fast. It's like overwhelming. But I tell people that the hassle of this is worth it because of the legacy that you can leave behind, right? And these are my 2 kids. And if we do this right for my family's farm, then those kids are going to be the 4th generation there. Okay, and that picture in the middle there, we live in an irrigation project, and my grandpa taught my dad to irrigate out of that concrete ditch. And last summer, my dad taught my little boy. And I'm here to tell you, if a little bit of hassle can ensure that that can keep going on for generations, it's sure worth a lot of that kind of hassle to me to make sure that that happens. So that's my pep talk for why this is really important. The last couple of things I'll mention are resources, and then I'm glad to take any questions. So if you guys have them, type them in the chat box and I'll be glad to answer them. I've got a blog. So if you're interested in agricultural law, you can check it out. It's called the Texas Agricultural Law Blog. You can Google that. For the New Mexicans in the crowd, a lot of the stuff I post is applicable everywhere. It's not always Texas specific. If you read the Clovis Livestock magazine and have seen my articles, those come from this blog. So feel free to check it out. When you go, a little box will pop up and ask you to enter your email address. If you do that and click subscribe, my post will come to you as an email. So you don't have to remember to go check it. Anytime I post, you'll get an email. I've also got a podcast. If you're a podcast listener, just look us up wherever you listen. It's called Ag Law in the Fields. If you're not a podcast listener, you can just go to that website that's listed here at the top, aglaw.libsyn.com. If you type that in, what you're going to find is 99 episodes. And an episode is just an audio interview I've done with an ag lawyer on a different topic. All you have to do is pull up on your computer, scroll to the topic you want, push play, and you listen to me talk to the lawyer. We've done a lot on estate planning. I mean, we've done everything. We've done 99 of them. For those of you on here that know my dad, he's the guest next week for the 100th episode. So that should be entertaining. You want to tune in for that anyway. And then my last slide here has got all of my information, my phone number, my email. I'm on social media. If you guys have questions after today, if you need more information, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure glad to help however I can. So with that, are there any questions, Jason, that we need to answer?
I have not yet seen any more that you have not already answered come in through the chat, but we'll maybe give a few moments for them to come in. And just to let you know, Tiffany, I actually provided your ag.tamu.edu email address in the chat. I hope that one still works. And
They both work. Yep, they both work.
Okay, so now you all have 2 different methods through which you can get a hold of Tiffany via email. But no, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today and provide a lot of what I think is pretty impactful information and things that we, as you've put, often get put on the back burner, and we don't dedicate the time to making sure these things are in order before they matter. I think there's probably there's absolutely something in here for everyone. And we're going to get ready to transition over. I'm going to hand it over to Marcy, who's going to take it on from here. I think we do have just a few housekeeping items, a survey to introduce to you all. So if everyone would stay on the line, we'd certainly appreciate that. And I just want to thank you one more time, Tiffany. Really appreciate you taking the time to provide us with that information. There is a question that just came in really quickly in the chat about unmuting participants if they have a time for a question, and I'm going to have to rely on Sonia to provide me that information if that's something with the current system, if we can do that or not. Sonia.
I just unmuted Mr. Heckendorn if he wants to go ahead and use his audio.
Perfect. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can,
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Do you have time for a question, or you guys need to get to another topic?
Certainly, certainly.
Okay, Tiffany is a neighbor of mine. We grew up in the same neighborhood. So hi, Tiffany.
Hi, John.
Hey, I had one of the things we run into with this ranch and trying to plan our estate is you have a ranch that say is worth, we have a small ranch, but say it's worth $1.5 million. And I have 4 kids, and not all of my kids want to continue ranching. And so one of the things my wife and I did is we set up a trust, and in the trust we set it up so that if they all want to sell it and move on, that's great with us. We're fine with that. But if one of them wants to continue ranching, they have the opportunity to lease it from the other children, if that makes sense. And so we kind of set that clause up in our trust. Is that a good way to do that? And because the value of the real estate, you can't pay for it with cattle, obviously,
Sure.
as everybody knows that ranches, but the other kids understand that that's in place, and they can either receive a small amount of lease every year, or the one that's wanting to operate it can then buy them out, but they may buy them out. They might be willing to sell it for a lower than market price, kind of base it more on an income value. So, and they can.
Yeah, I think that's one way to do it, right? I think that the lease is a good idea. I think that having a provision in there like that is really important. I've seen some people use kind of like a first option, like if somebody's gonna sell, the siblings get the first option to purchase. The only kicker with that, right, like we talked about earlier, liquidity is almost always an issue for ag. And so it may be that they don't have the ability to get the funds to buy that out, but there may be some things that you can look at there. So I think that's another option, a first option to purchase. Another thing that I've seen done, and this will depend on, right, what your situation and what you can do and can't do and what your kids want, but I've seen some people who basically set the kids down and said, okay, look, who still wants to be involved in the ranching operation? If you do, we're going to leave you the ranch. If you don't, we're going to leave you the cash that we have. And so maybe that's a retirement, plan, or maybe that's a life insurance policy. I know one family who bought a life insurance policy that's worth about the same amount of the ranch, and one kid gets the ranch, one kid gets the life insurance. They feel like they've treated them equally, but it kind of allows that ranch kid to keep ranching without having to buy out a sibling. So those are some other ideas to try and deal with that issue.
Great, thank you, Tiffany.
Sure.
And thank you for the question, John. I think that's something we can all take something from. And if you did not yet see it, Sonia just posted a question that should have went out to, or not a question, a comment in the chat that should have went out to everyone. But if anyone else does have a question and they prefer to use their audio rather than typing it in, or it's going to be easier to convey that question using the audio instead of typing it in, just click the reactions button, which should be at the bottom right-hand side of your Zoom screen. And then once you click that, select raise hand. And then once Sonia sees that, she can unmute your microphone and you can ask the question that way. So we'll maybe just pause for another minute or so to see if any of those come in, and if not, we'll go ahead and move on, and I'll hand it over to you, Marcy. Thanks again, Tiffany.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it. If I can help after this, let me know.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you, Tiffany. To kind of lead into or lead off of Tiffany's topic, we invited Dr. Shaddy Robinson and her graduate student, Taylor Hayes. They're with the Department of Economics and Agribusiness at New Mexico State, and they've been working on a survey that we would hope you all will participate in. We'll put the link to that survey in the chat box. And I'd ask them to maybe explain what the reasoning was behind the survey and what they hope to get out of it. So with that, I'm going to give the floor over to Chatty and Taylor.
Thank you, Marcy. And thank you, Tiffany. It was great. This is exactly where we're hoping to take Taylor's project. Taylor, are you out there?
I am. I'm trying to see if I can share my screen.
I just need to
Tiffany
get
might have to stop
Tiffany,
her
right,
share
to stop her
first.
share. Thanks.
Got it.
Thank you.
So Taylor is a graduate student here in the AggieCon Ag Business Department. She will be hopefully defending her project by May 14th, I hope. We haven't set the date, but she is actively collecting survey responses. And I'll let her discuss or introduce her project to everybody so you kind of have an idea of what you're in for.
Taylor, are you able to turn on your camera so I can spotlight your video?
Yes. Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so as Chatty said, we've been working on this project for my creative component. I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of background about it, and then give you guys either the QR code that you can use at the end. It is New Mexico specific. I know this is a Southwest, but if you're in New Mexico, I'd love it if you guys would take a little time to take it. Let's see. All right, so this kind of came up a few semesters back, and we were talking to a family, a ranching family that was looking at succession planning, and we're thinking about it. How do we help provide some stability for our rural communities out there? Because, I mean, if you think about it, they have the income, tax base, and just long-term growth that helps our communities out so much. And so what can we do to help that? They're really important, right? Our small and family businesses. Here's some stats on them. A little background for me, I grew up in 4-H, and so every summer as a 4-H member, we had a rodeo, and we would go out and talk to these small and family businesses to provide like donations or sponsorships. I mean, they're really important for our communities. But there are some hurdles with this. So the average life expectancy of a family business, just in general, not necessarily ag, is approximately 25 years or 2 generations. And then New Mexico's population of 65 plus is growing larger, as well as the average age of agricultural producers. It's increasing nationwide. And so specific to New Mexico, about 7% are considered young producers, which are 35 years old or younger. And the average ag producer for New Mexico is 60.8 years old. So these aging populations and all sorts of industries usually provide operating capital, ownership, or management. And so with succession planning, we know that it's time consuming, it's a multi-step process. Tiffany gave us so many examples of just with estate planning, how much goes into it, and it's unique to each business. But it definitely provides upon certain events like death or disability or retirement. And so the important part is that it happens sooner rather than later. So with the goals of this research, the initial work is the survey, and that's just to assess what is going out there right now. So the current knowledge about succession planning and the environment. So if it is a verbal agreement, if it's written, if that hasn't happened yet. And then with that information, what we're going to do is hopefully develop resources and more workshops that are tailored towards the specific needs of these small and family businesses. So basically, we're establishing how to support the continuation of New Mexico businesses. It is an online survey through Qualtrics. It's available in English or Spanish and is open to all industries. And on the right here is a QR code. So if you open up your camera on your smartphone and press on it, it should bring up like a little web page and take you directly to that survey. And I will put the web link in the chat box. But if you have any questions, this is the contact information for Chatty and I. We would love questions or feedback, and thank you guys for your time today.
Does anybody have any questions for Taylor? I will also tell everybody out there that the link for this survey, we're sharing it through the AggieCon Ag Business Facebook page, as well as a couple of other associations, Chamber of Commerce Association, Economic Development. They'll all be sharing this as well. So the survey is targeted for all of New Mexico. So it's not just agriculture, but the second question in is asking which sector you're involved with. So you can identify agriculture and it'll take you right in there. But if you're involved with government or you're involved with manufacturing, oil and gas, any of those other sectors also, we're looking for input for all of them, because rural development, economic development, and the stability of these rural communities is essential that all participants have some succession knowledge. I guess there's no questions. Marcy, are you still out there?
Actually, Marcy texted me, she got kicked out. So now she can't get back in because the event is already over according to her schedule. So I may ask Jason or Craig to jump in and kind of round it up for everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all. And again, I appreciate you all providing us with information on that survey. For anybody that hasn't seen it, I think Taylor posted the direct link to that in the chat, and it went out to everyone. So that's another easy way for y'all to access that. And while we're talking about surveys, we will be developing and sending out a Qualtrics survey to you all as participants. We would greatly appreciate any feedback that you're willing to provide. That is useful information, and I promise if you take the time to provide us with that feedback will be used as we continue to plan future Southwest Beef Symposia. Greatly appreciate everyone's time and participation. I thought we had a great meeting over the past few days, and looking forward to hopefully having another great series of meetings in 2022.
And
Unless,
oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you saw Dr. Wenzel's hand up. I've unmuted him, so I think he may want to chime in real quick.
okay. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Dr. Wenzel.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the link that it's in the chat. There is about 2/3 of the way through, there's a capital S, capital V, and then a space. Is that space supposed to be there?
Yes, that space is actually an underscore. It makes
Okay.
it a hyperlink and underlines all of it, so you can't see that. That's a good question.
Okay, so it's an underscore. Okay.
But the link does work. I just clicked on it and it took me to the survey pretty quickly. So it is indeed working. Again, really appreciate everyone. Bruce and Craig, do you have anything else? Looks like Marcy maybe got back in. Does anybody have anything else they want to add before we hop off for the afternoon or evening?
I'd just like to say thanks again to everybody. I think we're pretty good for our first jump out of the box going virtually. So again, Sonia, on the technical side, we really appreciate all your help. So
You're welcome.
especially us old guys.
Hey, I'm an old gal, so no problem.
Yeah, I'd also like to just thank everyone for coming out, and also just right here at the end, thank our sponsors one more time. New Mexico Cattle Growers Association and All Flex were our gold sponsors. Nutrition Plus and Sustainable Crop Insurance Services were our platinum sponsors this year. So we sure appreciate the support this year and every year. Thank you.
All right. And with that, I think think we're good to go ahead and wrap up for this year and hope to see everybody again next year if we don't see you before then. Everybody have a good evening.
Bye, y'all. Have a good rest of the evening.